One. Go.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everybody. I'm Gunnar Eos, and welcome to another episode of the Logical Gamers podcast. Today's episode is gonna be games that stand the test of time, games that might have come out 10, 15, 3 years ago that you can play, put it down, and come back to it 5 years from now, and it's the same experience. It's still a good game. Hence, it's standing up to the test of time. Because let's be real, a lot of games nowadays, they might seem cool when they first came out. The graphics and gameplay could have been amazing, but when you look at it later as you get older, they get a little stale. But in this episode, we're going to talk about games that, no matter how long it takes, they're still good to play. So, for my first game, I I always play this game. I usually play it like once a year. It's like I guess a unofficial ritual at this point. But my first game is Final Fantasy IX. Um, some of our viewers who may have watched the episodes before know that Nine is a special game to me because it's one of my first Final Fantasies on the PlayStation. That was one of my first personal consoles that wasn't my father's; it was mine. But besides all that, Nine holds up to this day because of its simple yet grindy mechanic. And I mean grindy in the most respectful way. So what I mean simple is that it's a traditional Final Fantasy game before the action RPG stage of Final Fantasy 13. So it's a turn taking ATB active time bar system. So it's a slow game. You go, your enemy goes, you go, your enemy goes. So the combat is staple RPG combat. The way you learn skills, it's linked to your armor and weapons. So when you get new armor, weapons, they have skills attached to them. The more you use that armor, that skill goes from being a temporary skill to a permanent skill. Super simple concept to manage. Basically means if you get a shit ton of armor and accessories, that's how you get a shit ton of passives and actives. So it's not a complex system like materia or a really weird system like drawing or a really intimidating system like the sphere grid from Final Fantasy X. It's simple. Learn these skills, fight an X number of battles, you get skills. And to me, that's one of the core reasons why the game just lasts so long and why you can play it to this day because it's simple and easy to understand. Anybody who's even has passing knowledge of RPGs, whether they like Final Fantasy or not, can pick up the game, understand the combat, understand how skills are learned and acquired, and go from there. And the story is pretty much your standard fairy tale story. Your hero's journey. You fight your big bad. There's the twist at the end. So it's a very simple story. It's not overly complex. Doesn't want you to think about philosophical ideals and weird concepts. It's a simple story, simple combat, but addictive combat and super grindy in the best way because you're once you understand how the skill system works, you're always going to be looking for every piece of armor because not everybody gets the same skills from a single earring, for example. Different characters can learn different things from that earring. So you're going to want to find all the armor, all the weapons, all the accessories in the game because you want to max out your team. So because of those three things, simple combat, easy to understand acquisition of skills, and simple but well done storyline, those three things make Final Fantasy IX, in my opinion, a game that was good back when it came out in 1999 or 98, sorry, and a good game if I wanted to play it right now in the year 2022, which, you know, thanks to porting and emulation, I can play it on my Switch if I want to. So, that's my first game, Final Fantasy IX, a true gem in my opinion. If any of our viewers or listeners haven't tried it, I suggest you pick it up. It's on the Switch, PlayStation, PC. It's practically on anything with a screen at this point. So that's my first game. I'm gonna pass it off to Mr. Hado Wolf, and he's gonna hit us with one of his games that stand the test of time.
So a game that stands the test of time for me is Sonic the Hedgehog, the original Sonic the Hedgehog. Um, the reason why I picked that game as my first choice is because Sonic, at the time when it came out on the Sega Genesis, it was simple and it's just as simple for when I was 7 years old playing it to now my 7 year old who plays it. In today's day and age where there's more complexity in video games, more, I guess one can argue, depth, but a child that's born, in the 2000s can still find enjoyment with how simple, straightforward, and fun that the very first Sonic game was. Hold forward, press jump occasionally. I can't get no simpler than that. And
Pretty much.
it's, um, because of that, because of the simple colors, the simple style of the characters, the fast pace way that the game plays. Um, he can play it on his tablet if he wanted to, and it will function the same way as playing on his Sega Genesis Mini that he has hooked up to the TV. It's all the same experience for him. So watching him play the game, it actually makes me realize that Sega developed a masterpiece back in the 80s. Um, so I give it that. I feel like Sonic the Hedgehog is a great video game that lasted this long, and due to its simplicity and the fact that it can be put on just about any platform and just about any person can play it, it will continue to last. It will continue to pass the test of time for me,
Yeah,
anyways.
Sonic's a good one.
So I'm done with that. I'm gonna pass it on to Esoteric. Your turn, bro.
All right. Well, you guys have some nice selections there. For me, the first selection that I'm going to pick has to be Super Castlevania 4 for the Super Nintendo. Um, I remember playing it back in the days. I don't believe when it was released in 1991 that I actually played it because I was about 3 years old, um, or something around that age or whatever. Um, but I did play it when I was a little older, and I did appreciate the game. My older brother had it, and I played it, and it was a phenomenal game. For those of you who don't know, this particular Castlevania game, it was a traditional side scroller platform. And it had a simplistic button scheme. Pretty much you used the D-pad to move around. You had one button to utilize your whip. You had another button to jump, and you had another button to pretty much use your sub action items. The reason why I say that this game aged very well, or kind of like past the hands of time, so to speak, is because I always mention this game. Even way back when, as you guys can attest to, like a few years back, I was playing the game again, and the same experience that I had back when I first was introduced to the game was kind of like the same feelings that I had towards it when I did play it. Um, just a couple of things to point out about that game. Like the music was phenomenal. Like I can listen to it on any particular platform, whether it's a computer, phone, whatever, and I can just easily recognize the track on Castlevania. The graphics, like the colors were so vibrant. Um it was like so unique. The characters really popped, and they did a really good job with the palette for a 16-bit system, so I got to give it to that. Um and one thing that also stood out was like the stages, the boss battles. You fought like some giant armored enemies, you fought like wyverns, you fought pretty much traditional Castlevania enemies, and it looked really good. If I do say so myself. Um, it's definitely a game that I would recommend for anyone to play who hasn't played it, even within this current like setting where all the graphics are like 60 frames per second and like high end rendering and so on. I feel like if you guys are interested in, old school games, that would be a great selection for you. So yeah, that concludes my first selection, and I'm gonna pass it on to you, Kong.
All right, cool. So, um, before I say mine, I have to talk about the ones you guys talked about. So, I have nothing to say about Final Fantasy IX because clearly I've never played it, and I am not a JRPG expert by no means, not even close. So I can't challenge what Gunnar said about Final Fantasy IX, but I'm sure there's a lot of truth to it. But Sonic, the first one, I don't know about that one. I don't think it's a bad game. I think it's fine, but it lacks the tempo and the fluidity that I think other platformers of the time had and nailed it, and to this day still, um, like you could still play those games. And one of those games is Super Mario. Take your fucking pick from Mario
I never
64.
I
Go
never
ahead.
mentioned Mario because Mario is not exactly a popular game within my household. Like all my kids play games. All of them have experience with Sonic. All of them responded positively to Sonic the Hedgehog. None of them responded positively to Super Mario. I'm the only one who will give Mario a chance in my household. So
That's
the way I
fair.
looked at it was, or the way that my first choice was designed based on how the times have changed in the opportunity of video games that a person can play, or the amount of video games a person can play versus to what the limitation was to when I was a kid. So that's why I ended up choosing Sonic as my first pick.
That's fine. Sonic can be your first pick, and if somebody who's listening to this agrees with you, I'm not fighting you on it. You can have that pick, and there's nothing wrong with the game. As far as like just a regular 1991 Sega game, like it's fine. It's better than most. But what I'll say is I don't personally think it stands the test of time. To me, it's my opinion. Um, because I played it recently. I played it like 5 or 6 months ago. And I tried it out. I was like, I never finished this game. I should go back and try it. And I was having a hard time enjoying the game because I don't think its level design makes sense to what the character is supposed to be. So when I would run with Sonic, I would constantly run into things. And it's to me that boggled my mind. And it's something I didn't notice back then when I was a kid. I just kind of let it, I didn't think about this stuff. It's like you want me to run fast, you want me to be fast. This is Sonic's whole gimmick, yet you punish me constantly for going fast. So to me, it's like this doesn't make a whole lot of sense. As a design, I don't think it was fully thought through. I think what makes Sonic an iconic character, which he is an iconic character, I think he's a great character. I like him. It's just his first game specifically, because that's the game you referenced. I think it's one of his weakest 2D games. No, it's his weakest 2D game available. Like if you play Sonic Rush on the GBA, for example, or the DS 2D Sonic games, those games are way better paced and way better designed than the original Sonic game. Even Sonic 3 on Sega Genesis is way better. It's not that much better, but it's a lot better than the first one from a level design perspective. That's all I was trying to say. I'm not criticizing Sonic fans. I think Sonic is a great franchise, and the library of games that it's produced, as well as the comics and anime and the movies, they're all great. I enjoy most of what the Sonic franchise has produced. I'm just saying the first game I think is overrated. That's just my opinion though. So to me, it's not in the museum of games that stand the test of time. It's as a franchise, yes, but the first game, absolutely not. Anyway, Super Mario I think does stand the test of time because they have still developed, or they still develop Mario games in that formula to this very day. Like we just got a 2D Super Mario game a few years ago. Like can't say the same about something like Sonic, right? And unfortunately, we can't say the same about something like Castlevania. Although
Oh.
Castlevania's situation is a little muddy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
With the company it's attached to, right? We did see things like Bloodstain, and we see games that emulate the Castlevania formula, but unfortunately, we haven't seen another Castlevania game. Even though I agree, Super Castlevania, when I played it last year, I immediately spoke to Esoteric about it, and I was gushing about the game because it's so good, and it definitely holds up
Well,
in today's
just to
standard.
correct that,
Mhm.
if you consider Castlevania input a port of 3 GBA games, then we technically have seen something Castlevania-like.
Oh yeah, the GBA advanced games, sure,
But as
sure,
far as new, no, that shit died with the PlayStation 3 one.
Well,
yeah,
that I get, but if we're going by definition of the topic, I'm going by particularly a game that can be played from when it launched and people will still admire it till this day.
yeah,
You know
yeah,
what I'm
yeah, for
saying?
sure.
So,
But what I
mm,
this I guess this is hard to articulate through just a Discord call, but my point is with Super Mario 1, not 2, 1 and 3 specifically, um
mm,
you can I think most people can still play those games, understand them, enjoy them, and get a challenge out of them, and get something. Not if you're not looking for a challenge, there's levels in Mario that you can play that you can enjoy, but those games you can still play today. People are still streaming that game today. Nintendo is still producing 2D Super Mario games, so it's not like that formula doesn't work anymore. Whereas if we're comparing it to Sonic, like Sonic almost doesn't know what he wants to be as far as like a consistent game. Like he has so many different designs that it's hard to kind of track. It's a lot like Crash Bandicoot. Crash Bandicoot, I love that game, but Crash Bandicoot had an identity crisis for a while there, and so did Donkey Kong. And I love Donkey Kong, but I could call a spade, and I can call it what the way I see it. Those games had a rough time figuring out what they wanted to be in certain periods of time. So Mario, on the other hand, never had that problem. So I don't know. I'm gonna give. And Mario's not my favorite platformer. So I mean, I'm just trying to be objective about it. I'm trying to be objective with my opinion. I know that sounds silly, but uh, it's what I'm going with. I think Mario stands the test of time, specifically Super Mario on NES and Super Mario 3 on the Super Nintendo. The second one, I don't think it's a bad game, but it's not the same. Again, that's a example of Mario having an identity crisis. But really, if you dig in deeper, it's Nintendo using assets for another game and slapping Mario on top of it. So like, I don't know
I
if that
remember
necessarily
that, yeah.
counts. You
yeah.
know, so I don't know. We can get lost in the grass here in semantics, but Mario's my game that tests the test time.
Hmm,
Stands
all
the
right.
test of time. Sorry, I'm a little frazzled here. Just moving
No, no,
something.
no.
But
Okay.
yeah, go ahead, Gunner. I don't know if Wolf had anything to add to the Sonic uh
No.
conversation. Okay, cool.
Okay. So, my second game that stands the test of time for me, that this one, it's debatable. I guess it's well, this is all personal, but it's a game again, much like Final Fantasy, that I can go back to. Final Fantasy 9, I can go back to 20 years from now and play it. Um, Advanced Wars, the first one specifically, Advanced Wars. Advanced Wars was kind of the first game that I found back on the GBA before I knew what a strategy RPG was. I didn't really know what to call these games back when I was young. It was just like, a game where I see the map. That's how I described it. As so again, much like Final Fantasy 9, to me the concept of Advanced Wars is simple enough that anybody who understands what a strategy RPG is, or even if they don't, can pick it up and play it. Like the premise is simple. It's your army versus their army. And in the beginning, they start you off small. you only have infantry, then you get advanced infantry, then you start getting Humvees and tanks, and then sooner it scales up to you've got like B-52 bombers dropping freaking heavy ordnance on some guy's artillery. But when you start off at stage 1, level 1, it's just infantry. And it's your army fights this army, and you capture cities and you capture factories, and that's how you make more units to make your army, and everything's on the fly. You might start off with a small force, but how you approach the situation is up to you. And that's pretty much the backbone of strategy RPGs. Things like XCOM, that's the same principle. Final Fantasy Tactics, Tactics Advance is the same principle. Basically, the backbone of strategy RPGs is simply this is your map, these are your forces, these how you delegate your forces on a given map to accomplish the goal of victory in most cases. So I think Advanced Wars does it in a clever way where it starts you off small, and then it shows you what you can do, and then by the end of the game you're doing 20 different things with 20 different environments and vehicles and military units. But I can take that now and give it to a younger person. This might be, you know, incorrect, so sue me. But I can give it to a younger person and they can
Done.
go, "Oh." They can look at it and say, "Oh, that's what I have to do." Okay, and then they can start playing Advanced Wars that came out like the early 2000s. And I'm only bringing this up, one, because I'm a fucking huge Advanced Wars freak, and I was sad when it seemingly vanished off the Nintendo landscape. But even though it did get delayed, they are doing a remake slash port hybrid thing of Advanced Wars 1 and 2. So again, for our listeners and viewers, much like Final Fantasy IX, that can be played on modern consoles, cell phones, and PCs. If you have a Switch, I say keep your ears and eyes open for Advanced Wars 1 and 2. It did get pushed back, but it is coming out. The art styles, I'm not the biggest fan of the new art style, but that's just the critique. That's just, I'm looking for things to nitpick at. The As long as the essence of the game stays intact from what I remember and how it is, again, it's one of those games that you don't have to be a strategy game god. You can pick it up, play it, and I put money on the fact that you would have fun with it, unless strategy games aren't your thing. So that's my second one. Advanced Wars. I think you can still play the GBA version to this day and get the same enjoyment. And hey, we got some new remakes of it coming on the horizon. So that's my second one. Wolf, do you have another one to hit us with?
My actual other one is on the same video game character that Blanka Kong was just talking about, but it was actually Mario 64 that I chose as my second one.
That's a
The
good
reason
one.
why I chose Mario 64 is because, one, I actually have experience with Mario 64, and two, I was actually watching some speedrun videos the other day on YouTube of people who did speedruns just weeks ago on Mario 64. Um, I know, I believe I understand that that's the game that revolutionized, the 3D platforming and exploration, and done
Essentially, yeah.
correctly, right?
Mhm.
And done correctly on the first try. Um, but even then, so I when Mario 64 was remade on the 3DS, I had fun playing it regardless, and I played it again, and I had fun playing it. I have not, in I don't see a reason as to why anybody wouldn't appreciate the game if you're a gamer in some way. Um, but yeah, for me, Mario 64 definitely is a game that I feel anybody who's a gamer should pick it up and try it out, and I'm pretty sure they'll have fun with it in some way, shape, or form. So for me, that's my second option. On to you, Esoteric.
Okay, well, I see here that the Mario games are pretty popular, which of course they would be. I mean, they're still going strong and has been around since, if I'm not mistaken, before we were even born. So um, that definitely makes sense. The next one that I chose, uh, based on what I've seen, I haven't seen a lot of people playing it currently, but I feel like whoever has played it or um, wants to play it does respect this particular game. And my second selection was Metroid Prime. Um, so Metroid Prime, for those of you who don't know, it was released in, I believe, 2002 on the Nintendo GameCube. And I will be the first to admit I was completely biased about the game simply because that wasn't what the traditional Metroid game I was accustomed to. I was used to, like, as you guys call now, the Metroidvania series, that type of Metroid game. And Nintendo decided to go and change it up into a like first person. So with that being said, I after actually giving the game a chance and actually playing it, like I loved the game. The game was amazing. Um they were able to pretty much kind of transition all the key things that Samus acquires throughout the game into the form of a first person shooter, and I felt that that was amazing. Like it was really dope. It was really unique, and I was really excited about it. Let me just give you guys some examples. So, um, if you guys played, you guys know about the power beam that Samus acquires, the wave beam, etc. Also, her like traditional suits, such as the power suit and various suit. All those things was available to her within Metroid Prime. Also, one of the things that I was concerned about that they was able to transition flawlessly, I would have to say, was the morph ball. Um, I figured that the morph ball would not be utilized because it's a first person shooter, but Nintendo, or if I'm not mistaken, the company, what was it, Retro Studios? Would anybody know?
Yeah.
Metro Studios.
Hmm.
Okay, yeah, Retro Studios was able to take the morph ball and articulate it within the first person shooter, and I was like amazed by it. Um, so that's one of the main reasons why I chose Metroid. Another reason is because they're even working on a Metroid Prime 4. A lot of people that I've discussed this with, a lot of like forums I looked at, they were eager to see another Metroid game. Um, in the first person shooter, because we did get one recently called Metroid Dread. Phenomenal game. Um, and yeah, that's one of the main reasons why I chose Metroid Prime. I feel as though if people were to who haven't played it in this generation were to play it, I feel like they would appreciate the game. Much like I mentioned about Castlevania, like the graphics, the sound effects, the color scheme, it really they really like brought it on with that game and really articulated what the GameCube can do at its time. I feel like it pretty much encompassed all of like the GameCube's overall hardware to pretty much create that game. Um and yeah, that's gonna conclude my second selection. I kind of like rambled on there, but you know.
Hey,
That's the point of a podcast, right?
yeah,
Ramble a
man.
Yeah,
little
Just
bit.
yeah,
get your
true,
point
true.
across.
All right.
And
So
back to you, Kong.
thanks. So my next pick is gonna be a little, I guess, recent, and I say recent, but it's an old, it's a 20-year-old game now. Is Resident Evil remake for the GameCube. That game, I think, does everything that we love about. I say we, not everybody in this chat loves Resident Evil, but we as anybody who loves the game, um, does everything that Resident Evil 1 did well and amplified it to the nth degree. Um, even graphically, it still holds up to today's graphics. Like that's to me, that's like amazing that Capcom and Nintendo were able to produce a remake of a classic game, somehow make it scarier, better, look better on a GameCube, which is a strong system. Like no shit on the GameCube, but like you wouldn't expect that, right, from the Nintendo brand. Like this classic horror game that, I mean, it redefines, like, Resident Evil is always considered to be, or by most at least, considered to be like the benchmark of horror games, and they somehow managed to top themselves with the remake of Resident Evil 1. And to this day, I played it last year, early last year, like maybe in March or something like that, because I never actually finished it because for some reason I had the game back in the day and I just never made the time for it, and I eventually sold my games, and then I wanted to get back into it, so I downloaded it on the PlayStation 4 and I played it, and I'm like, wow, this game looks fucking great. And it's like, and this game came out in like 2003 or something like that, or 2004, somewhere around
Exclusive to the GameCube at that. Not exactly the most cutting edge platform.
there. Right. And I mean, that's maybe that's a disingenuous statement because GameCube was like the second strongest system of the generation, right behind Xbox. It was technically stronger than the PS2, so which is regarded as the best system of that generation, which I don't disagree with. But it just from a branding standpoint, you don't expect a game like that to come on a system like that. But GameCube had a lot of horror bangers on there. You know, Resident Evil, Eternal Darkness, etc. So that was pretty impressive, and I see people stream it all the time. And it's the game that I think most people recommend. Like if you want to get into air quotes classic Resident Evil in its best form, Resident Evil 1 remake is like the way to go. And I think a second, you know, a close second would be Resident Evil 2 remake. Um, but in a lot of ways, I still think 1 remake is better than 2 remake.
I'd
And
have to agree with that. Yeah.
I might get some shit for that, but like that's how good 1 remake is. Even to today's standard, I would put that up against any modern game that you want to put in front of me. Last of Us, Ghost of Tsushima, Horizon, God of War. Like those games are great and cool and all, but Resident Evil 1 I think still beats those games out from a quality standpoint. So that's my third.
Funny story with that game. When I first saw the Resident Evil period, it was the remake. So I never knew about the PlayStation one with the iconically bad lines.
Really?
No, I never knew. I was like I knew, again, it's like kind of like the Final Fantasy series for me. I knew about Resident Evil 2, but I'm like, yeah, the 2, that means there was a 1. I guess this is it. And I'm like, where did this start from? And then later on, as I got older, I was like, this was on PlayStation. Holy shit. And when I saw the GameCube to the PlayStation one, even though it's a disingenuous comparison, it's just like, holy shit. Like, it's not just a simple we up the textures. This is like from the ground
Nah,
up.
that game is I can't even, words cannot describe how good it is. And for me, and I was so jealous when it came out on the GameCube because I had everything except GameCube, and I'm like, are you kidding me? On the GameCube, like Microsoft couldn't get this, but you know, it is what it is.
Again, mini funny story about that. It was supposed to be a Microsoft Xbox exclusive, but when the producer of Resident Evil 4 asked the Microsoft rep, give me like in a couple words, what is Xbox? Like, it's fun, entertainment, blah blah blah. He couldn't come up with anything. Like,
Oh, I
he
didn't
couldn't
know
come up
that.
with anything, so he got pissed and he said, "All right, cool, because you can't answer that basic question of what your video game system is supposed to do. I'm gonna go to Nintendo." And by time like the Xbox head scrambled to get back on the train in Tokyo to get to him and Nintendo already signed the deal. So yeah,
Wow,
fun
I
fun
gotta look
fact.
that
Look
up.
it up.
That's
Yeah,
a
look
great
it up.
story. Yeah.
Yeah. Xbox. It was supposed to be on Xbox, and
That
did
would
not
have been
happen.
a monumental deal. Huge for Xbox.
Yeah, that would have put him on the top for sure.
Wow.
But yeah, no. So yeah, I when I went back in time and played the original one on PlayStation, I was like, no, it's the remake. I'm sorry. This is one of the few instances where the remake trumps the original, and the original only stays around because it's obviously the original. There wouldn't be a remake without the original.
Right. Yeah.
So no, I agree with that. That's a good pick. Okay, so my last one is going to be, I think, if you're listening or watching this podcast and you've been around for a while, you're gonna like shake your head and go, yeah, well, obviously. It's Doom. As in not Doom 2016, not Doom Eternal, not Doom 64, Doom. Like OG straight up Doom.
Yep,
Um
yep.
like I played that on like back when we had the family PC, when PCs were expensive and
Oh
really
yeah.
it was a household that pulled the resources together. I played Doom and our computer was off the fucking QVC network. I'm pretty sure half the people listening don't even know what the QVC network is. It was basically you bought stuff, you saw it on television and you called the number and you ordered it right there and then. Some jank computer before Alienware and fucking even Dell. So it barely played it. It barely ran it. But like my ass was playing Doom when my father would let me play Doom because my mother wouldn't let me play it because it's I say super violent, but by today's standards, it's a Game of Thrones episode. But back then, it was uber violence. You can check all the fucking Congress sessions they had about video games causing violence, and Doom was mentioned a lot.
Yeah.
But oh man, Doom was amazing. Like it's just like here's a gun, you're some angry dude. Why he's angry? Demons. He's just angry because demons, and go around and just blow these demons away. And it was one of the first games that made me realize that I like FPSs. And like I played that game as often as I could. And you know, after a while, I kind of stopped playing Doom because we moved on from the PC. That PC died, and then we all got our own computers, and I never really tried to get back into it. And then Doom 2016 came out, which is I guess a spiritual remake to the original Doom. And when I played Doom 2016, I was like, oh man, this is just Doom. Like it's Doom with HDMI, HD graphics now. And then that got me to go back and play the original Doom. I was like, "Oh man, this game is just as good as it was back when I first played it." And now I can appreciate it more being older and having that, the the faculties to appreciate certain things other than what they just present on the surface. And yeah, no, I love Doom. Like again, I made this point like twice already, but if you can get your hands on Doom is now pretty much on any console. It's on PlayStation, Xbox, PC, Switch even. Play the original Doom. If you're even a remote fan of FPSs, like it's a staple, I should say, in the FPS community, and you can't go wrong with Doom. Doom all day. All right. Well, before I go ranting on about the glories of Doom, um, that's it. That's my last one. So, Dev, do you got one more for us?
My last one is Street Fighter 3 Third Strike.
Hmm.
The reason why I
Very
picked
nice.
the reason why I picked Street Fighter 3 Third Strike is because the game is freaking awesome. It's phenomenal. Um, it's very smooth, very consistent. Yeah, you have things that it could have done better. This is why we keep making video games, franchises so that it gets better or appeals to new audiences. But I think Street Fighter 3 gave me what I love the most about fighting games, which is the stress factor of landing your combos, knowing your matchups, understanding your characters and your opponent's choices, along with that it's faster paced than say Street Fighter 4, which is a pretty slow paced fighting game. Um, it and then the parry system,
Yeah.
not overly complex, not not underwhelming. I think the parry system lands perfectly in the middle. Um, the game doesn't throw many things at you at one time during the fight. You pick your super, you pick your character, you pick the super, and then you go. You know, I think Street Fighter 3 definitely opened my heart to video games from when I was younger. And I think it's the only fighting game at this point where I can play and probably enjoy the most out of older fighting games instead of being frustrated by the insane damage or the character floating across the screen when they jump. Street Fighter 2 kills me with certain things. But even though Street Fighter 2 is probably a good example of a game that lasts the test of time because Capcom is always remaking Street Fighter 2 or putting it on some platform. Um, but my personal feel is if they was to re-release, say, Street Fighter 3 again, it would definitely be a buy for me. So for me, Street Fighter 3 is just, when I say 3, I mean Street Fighter Third Strike. The third iteration of Street Fighter 3 is almost damn near perfect as a 2D fighting game. My personal opinion on it.
I
Esoteric?
I I agree. I agree 100%. Especially with their little mechanic, the parry system. Like, although some matchups may have been bad, the parry system was pretty much the answer for everything. Not only did you have to know your character in order to use the parry system, you had to know other players' characters. So, it was a nice implement. I really appreciate that game, and that's definitely a nice selection. Um, Now, for my last selection, I'm not sure if there's anybody out there who's like looking into the game or wants to play or is remotely interested in it, but I selected this game based upon me playing it as a kid and me looking at it like recently and just wanting to play it, like being eager to play it and just thinking that other people would want to play it. So I'm not really sure if it stood the test of time by like everyone else standards, but it definitely did for me. And my last selection would have to be Comic Zone on the Sega Genesis. So um Comic Zone was a basic platformer, but it did things really well and innovative that made it stand out to me. So the premise of the game is you're this guy um who creates comics and whatnot, and then he gets trapped by some villain, I don't recall the name, and he gets thrown into his own comic book, and he's pretty much fighting enemies that he drew within this comic book. So what I loved about the game is the fact that you're 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 basically progressing through a story within a comic book essence. And what I mean by that is you're jumping over panels. You're kind of like leaping over panels, kind of like lowering yourself within panels. You're turning pages. As you're fighting enemies, you're ripping the pages. Like the effects was just amazing. Um, it had a solid combat system. Little minimal inputs here and there. Uh, as far as I recollect, the responsiveness I would have to check again because it's been a while since I've played it. The responsiveness of the controller kind of like meshed really well with the character. You actually felt as if you were hitting these guys, and this is pre vibration, pre rumble pack that the N64, you know introduced us to. um and yeah, it was just an amazing game. The Again, as the other two games I mentioned, vibrant colors, just the graphics were like really nice. And I think the Sega Genesis was a 16-bit console as well, if I'm not mistaken. So for them to kind of like push the color palette for that game, it was phenomenal. The banter of the character, which was kind of like what you kind of like saw later on in the years, like certain characters who had like unique personalities and like funny and like, for lack of a better word, assholes. Like, as you're beating enemies, he's literally just cracking jokes, making fun of them. It was just tons of fun. Now, again, I'm not certain if people would want to play it. I think that they would, but I can't. I haven't heard anybody else ever like talk about it aside from this particular circle. Um, but I feel like if it was to come out and people were to be reintroduced to the game that is Comic Zone, I feel like people would really enjoy it. So yeah, that's my last selection.
Okay. I hate to do it, but I'm gonna do it. I disagree with that last pick, Esoteric. Comic Zone, while I love the game, and me, you talked about it before, and we gush about it a ton. I even have all the trophies for Comic Zone on PS3. There's no platinum for it, but I did it 100%. I did everything. I adore that game, but I think it's the exact opposite of a game that would stand the test of time. I think that game is stuck in 1995 when it came out on the Sega Genesis and will forever be stuck in that time. It's been re-released on Sega collections in the past, and it's also been re-released on, I think it's available on like iPhone and Android. I think you could play it in a variety of different ways, but I think a better pick would have been like Streets of Rage 2. I think that's more iconic and a more accepted test of time air quotes game than something like Comic Zone. And that could be just a timing thing, but I think Streets of Rage is a better beat 'em up. Streets of Rage 2 specifically is a better beat 'em up than Comic Zone would ever dream to be. And Comic Zone is just a beat 'em up. Like, it's extremely repetitive, it's very short. It's a great game, but it's not an amazing game. So I'd have to disagree with you. I mean, you could still pick that game. That's fine, but I can't not point that out because I can't. I got to get that off my chest. It's just not that game, To me, that's just my opinion, though.
Well, okay. So here's the thing. So by definition, based off the topic that we're discussing, like what are you considering that's a game that stands the ends of time? Like,
To me, it's a game that
yes.
was good then, was great then, is great now, and to our perception will be great in the future, right? Something like Miss Pac-Man, that's a game that'll stand the test of time. Tetris, that's a game that'll stand the test of time. Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, that's a game that'll stand the test of time because people always find their way going back to it. Like, it never dies, it never goes away, right? And it's still considered to be a fun fucking game to this very day. Super Mario 64, that was Wolf's pick. That's a great example. Like, that's a game that it will never fucking die. People will always compare something to Mario 64. Like, it just won't go away, right? So that's my definition of what the topic was. And so and me challenging Sonic and Comic Zone is my honest feelings, but also to fill time. So I mean, don't take it like personally. I'm just trying to like
So what?
to fill time.
Oh, to fill time. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
I thought you said something else.
Oh,
Go on.
No, I'm not
say.
taking it. I'm not taking it personally. I was just inquiring because I feel like because of what Comic Zone was back then and the ability of me still wanting to play it. Now, Streets of Rage, yes, definitely was a great pick, but it was one of those games at that time that like introduced that particular like style. I chose
it
Comic
didn't.
Zone because it already
Comic
took
Zone
a
came at the
particular
end. Comic Zone came at the end of the Sega's life. What do you call it?
Man,
Lifespan.
Oh my god, I'm brain farting.
Lifespan.
Lifespan. Thank
lifespan.
you.
Yeah.
Fuck. Lifespan. That's the word I wanted. I know words, I promise. So Comic Zone came out late 95, early 96, somewhere around there, when the PlayStation 1 was already out. So Comic Zone not only didn't sell well, it was also met with mediocre reviews because I hate to say it, but looking at it from an objective standpoint of beat 'em up games, it's mediocre. I love the game, but it's mediocre. It's okay. It's not great. I think you're approaching, and you're not wrong, mind you, because you can't be wrong because this is an opinion based topic. You're approaching it from instead of saying it's games that stand the test of time, period, it's games that stand the test of time to me, period. Like in my bubble, in my circle. It's like, I don't know if it can apply to you in your library of games, and that's fine. It could stand the test of time for you. But I think for most people, it's like pretty unanimous that Streets of Rage 2 is like the best beat 'em up ever, especially on the Sega Genesis. That's me. I'm just trying to be the devil's advocate. I'm trying to challenge some of the entries here to make it interesting, to make the conversation a little more dynamic than us just saying, I think this game is great for XYZ, moving on. Like, there needs to be a little rigidness to the conversation, which is why I'm doing it, you know? But I'm not doing it to, like, be a dick. I mean, maybe I am being a dick.
No.
I'm also doing it because I honestly feel the things I'm talking about, I believe.
Like, I get you. Like, you. Okay, go ahead.
Believe in, for example, going back to the Super Mario 1, Super Mario 1 and 3.
Yeah.
That to me is more, it's pretty factual than really opinionated. The Super Mario 1 and 3 are phenomenal games.
Yeah.
They're games that if was more accessible to me without me having to really go looking for it, or I can just download it or something like that without it being a problem, I would play it. Now, my point of view of test of time for the topic was games that are accessible, that people of different mindsets and age groups can play.
Yeah, a mass appeal.
That's where mass appeal. So that's where my point of view came from. Now, I'm still gonna stand by believing that Sonic, the first one, third one, all the early 2D Sonic games, in my personal opinion, will forever work. Now, do they work in terms of like saying being strong in maybe level design? I can't disagree with that, because it's just weird that I jump on a platform and I have to stand there and wait for it to elevate high for me to keep running. That kind of like kills that super speed tempo that you were talking about, or super speed feel that you're looking for. Yeah, the momentum, that's the proper word. But at the same time, I would still argue that regardless of the errors that the game has, it's still come on. You could open your phone right now and download Sonic the Hedgehog for free from actual Sega and start playing it. And when you're tired of it, you just delete it. You know, like it's a very brain dead investment, which, you know, in today's day and age, yeah. So for me, that's why I say that, you know, the early 2D Sonic games, 1, 2, 3, definitely are games that 20 years from now, I really wouldn't be surprised if my grandkids have downloaded it on their projector screen that's in front of them. I don't know how far, you know, cell phones are gonna become in
cell
20
phones are
years,
gonna be in your fucking brain. You're gonna project
exactly
the image off your eyeball.
Granddad, I'm playing Sonic in my eyeballs.
You know, but I'm just saying, is more so, my picks was more so on the accessibility of how
that's fair.
The game works.
There's nothing wrong with that, and that's the interesting part of these topics, is it's open for different interpretation. Like, we're all gonna kind of go in and be like, okay, well, I think this is how this question is. This is how I'm perceiving this question, and so I'm gonna answer it under these like parameters. There's nothing wrong with that. It brings a different like vibe to the conversation, which I think is healthy. So like, again, you know, and I don't mean to sound like a broken record. I'm not, and nobody's entry is incorrect, right? It's just, I'm gonna challenge some of it because that's just who I am. Like, if I don't agree with something, I'm like, I'm gonna let you know, right? And I'm gonna tell you why I feel that way. So I think Comic Zone is a fantastic game. I adore it. I fucking air quotes platinumed it on PS3. I played it last year on the Sega Genesis collection on PS4. Like, I love that game, dude. But Test of Time, maybe in my heart, but not in the world. I'm just saying. That's all I'm saying. Anyway.
I can give a pretty good example because a lot of the games that you guys mentioned, again, my kid is a very integral part of what I do with my free time now, especially when it comes to video games.
Yeah.
So he plays because he has the Sega Genesis Mini thing, which, thank you. So he always says thanks to Esoteric for it because he really appreciates it. He loves Comic Zone. He really loves Comic Zone, and he does play it when he plays the Genesis. However, he invested more of his time to Streets of Rage. I had to sit there and play it with him. He wouldn't allow me to get up. And we played Streets of Rage on hours, on hours, on hours, on hours, and hours. He just cannot get enough of that. And I think it's very important for us to really compare what is available now, what is accessible now compared to what we had before. And if he can get on his tablet and play something like Roblox, which every kid plays, or or he has the PS4. He has two PS4s, a Nintendo Switch,
Ballin'.
sitting right next to the Sega Genesis Mini, and he still gravitates to the Sega Genesis Mini more than he does to the more updated consoles, because I feel like maybe it's the colors or the simplicity or the challenge factor. Maybe those are the things that's pulling him towards those. But definitely, I understand what Blanka Kong is saying, where Streets of Rage is definitely an insane pull on those types of beat 'em up genre games. But at the same time, he does puts in his fair share of Comic Zone. He just gets frustrated with it because he doesn't understand why this has to happen versus that has to happen. Like, he'll make his judgment as like, this doesn't make sense to me. And then that's when he'll lose interest for the moment. But Streets of Rage, no matter how weird it is that the boss back is turned to you, but you somehow float into his arms to throw you, that for him is completely logical. So I definitely can see the Streets of Rage point. But I still think that we all definitely chose some good ones.
Oh, yeah, it was a good list. I still got one more,
definitely
but
chose some good ones. Oh, sorry.
no, it's okay. It's
Go
all
ahead.
right. It's all right. It's not. We're not on network television, so it's cool. So I've got two. I'm gonna cheat. Fuck it. So first is a recent game, Super Smash Brothers Ultimate. That game will never be topped. There's no way that we're gonna get a better crossover than what that game has been able to pull off.
I completely agree.
So that game will, I think, in a lot of ways, will replace Super Smash Brothers Melee. In some ways, it won't. In some ways, it won't. Right, and that's fine. But I think we will never get a better Super Smash Brothers game than the one that we currently have on the Switch. And I don't think that there'll ever be a better crossover game, a pure video game, than the Smash Brothers we have now. I don't think it's even, like, with all the copyright and every character's being attached to certain companies, and like the gaming industry popularity, and so much money's invested in, like, it's not necessarily about the gamers. It's about the
different
fucking
fighting game franchises in the same game: Tekken, Street Fighter, and
King of
KOF.
Fighters. Yeah, that's crazy. I was so hoping that Scorpion from Mortal Kombat would make it, because that would be like the perfect icing on top. But I think Super Smash Brothers for sure will stand the test of time 100%. My last entry is not a game, but an era. And Wolf kind of prompted this thought in my head when he talked about the Sega Genesis Mini, on how his son finds himself playing it more than any other console. I think the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo are the greatest pair of gaming machines that we'll ever see, with the best collection of games that we'll ever be able to experience. Because 2D graphics, 16-bit 2D sprite graphics, there's a certain beauty that I think got lost, or no, not that I think, I know has been lost to time ever since we moved to 3D graphics and found ourselves to like today's standard of like photorealistic, hyper realistic characters and hyper realistic characters and all this like hyper realism. Like, we got away from what made games fun in the first place. And I think the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis are perfect advocates for that era and will forever. I mean, Mega Man X, Castlevania, Donkey Kong Country, Legend of Zelda, Super Mario, Comic Zone, Streets of Rage, Golden Axe, Rocket Knight Adventures. I mean, there's so many amazing games. I feel blessed to have lived through that era, and I know that even if I'm alive in 40 years, I can still go back, boot up a Super Nintendo, and have a fucking blast, and even discover new games that I haven't like realized. Like, I was like, oh wow, this game is fucking cool. Like, I know that that's a strong possibility, and that's, to me, that's amazing. So that's my final entry. Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis are the systems that will stand the test of time. A close second would probably be the PlayStation 2. But those are my entries. I know I rambled there, but I kind of wanted to get that in before we wrap up. So anyway, this was an episode for the week. Games that will stand the test of time, in our opinion. Of course, we all have different opinions, which makes the conversations more interesting. So, if you want more conversations like this, you can find them on Logical Gamers on YouTube every Wednesday at 12 p.m. You'll have a new podcast topic. Comment down below some of the games that you feel will stand the test of time. Comment down below any topics that you want to hear us discuss in the future. You can also find us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook under Logical Gamers TV. We also stream on Twitch. So Mr. Esoteric streams under Logical Gamers TV on Twitch every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. He plays mostly action-adventure games like Tomb Raider, Dark Souls, first-person shooters like BioShock. He even plays games like Splatoon and Fall Guys, so he's a pretty diverse player. You can also find me, Blanka Kong, on Twitch. I don't have a set schedule, but just check me out and follow so you can be notified when I'm online. I usually play platformers, retro games, indie games, and Monster Hunter and Pokemon. Those are kind of like the games that I like. Esoteric, can you tell the people where they can find us on the socials? Even though I already did, but you can repeat it and wrap it up.
All right, guys, you can find us on Logical Gamers TV under all the socials. That's pretty much what it is. And just look for the light bulb icon and you're good to go.
All right, guys, have a good night. Thanks for the combo.
Right,
Next
take
time.
care.
Laters.